Hey there, my lovely friends. Welcome to another Holy Shed. And if you were hanging out for me earlier on and I stood you up, I'm really sorry. It was not intentional. But here we are, still in the season of Epiphany in the church calendar. And as by now you probably know, I'm using this time in the shed to talk about some of my own epiphanies and people who have been epiphanous, as it were, for me. Today, I want to talk about a man I met in 1984, someone whose life and work connects with what we could call the dark epiphany dawning upon all of us at this time, which of course is the realization of climate change and the emergency that is bringing to all of us on planet Earth. It's not a welcome epiphany, God knows. It is, in fact, a revelation that many of us are tempted to avoid and turn our back on. But of course, in the end, we will have to face it, or at least our children and grandchildren will have to face it. But apparently, the whole thing is beginning to dawn upon many of us now, because according to surveys, 3/4 of us here in the UK say that we worry about the environment. And according to YouGov, the environment rates as one of our top 3 priorities, which only makes me wonder what the other 2 could possibly be, because I can't imagine anything more important and more of a high priority to us than what's happening to our planet. Going back to the beginning, historically, the environmental movement got underway after the publication in 1962 of Rachel Carson's groundbreaking book, Silent Spring, which documented the destructive effects to the earth of the indiscriminate use of pesticides. Here she is, in icon form by Kelly Lattimore, emerging out of the woods with her binoculars and her notebook in hand. She was a great nature lover as well as a scientist and an analyst of what was going on in nature. Well, as you can imagine, the backlash from the chemical industry to her book was massive. But, the message was powerful and persuasive, and the book and its message gained traction. And, bit by bit, as we went through the 60s and into the early 70s, it began to dawn upon many people that the problem wasn't just pesticides, but all kinds of ways in which we humans, especially in the West, were responsible for devastating degradation of the earth and its creatures. That said, environmentalism remained a relatively marginal concern for a long time, with Greens being portrayed as, the loony fringe. I mean, really, until the last couple of decades, when the effects of climate change started to hit home. For me personally, it was back in the late 70s and early 80s that I began to pick up on so-called green issues, which were not very popular at all in the wider population, and I can tell you this, were pretty much unheard of in the church and in the evangelical and charismatic sector of the church, particularly, which I inhabited at that time. And as soon as I began to voice, these concerns, I was, eyebrows went up, and I was warned that I was flirting with paganism and earth worship and all this kind of thing. And, as usual, I took no notice whatsoever. Then in 1984, I read this book called Seeing Green by Jonathan Porritt, pictured here, a young hippie-looking strip of a lad who was director of Friends of the Earth. And, I loved this book. And, I felt especially challenged by his chapter about the spirits of the future, in which he directed attention toward Christianity and the church. Commenting on that passage in Genesis 1, the creation story, which speaks of God giving man dominion over creation, Jonathan said, "What a lot of problems that little passage has caused." I mean, he is a very gentlemanly person, so it's quite mildly put, isn't it? What a lot of problems that little passage has caused. Say that again. And he expressed bewilderment that people who claim to worship the creator of the earth seem to have so little concern about the what was happening to it and the way that we were treating it and destroying it. But, far from being antagonistic toward the Bible or toward Christianity, he went on to say that, one of the most crucial tasks for Christians today is to reinterpret the Bible, to reinterpret the meaning of dominion in terms of stewardship and ecological responsibility. Christianity, he says in the book, has often participated in suppressing a sense of reverence for the earth, despite the pagan hangover of the harvest festival. So, the environmental problem, Jonathan argues, lies in the ascendancy of a culture of scientific materialism, which means a despiriting of the material world, reducing it to mere matter. It seems obvious to me, he wrote, that without some huge groundswell of spiritual concern, the transition to a more sustainable way of life remains improbable. He believed that in order to get on board with a different way of living with relationship to the earth, spirituality was a central issue. And he said that while this was obvious to a growing number of non-religious, spiritually minded people, it appeared that the church was blind to the issue. And he wrote this, he said, "I can't help but be astonished at the sheer lack of urgency among church leaders today, as the winds of change whistle up their richly caparisoned copes. Where on earth are they? Can't they see that thousands are already engaged in rediscovering the essence of Christian spirituality without excessive concern for orthodoxy or dogma? Can't they see the green shoots creeping up between the flagstones of their deserted cloisters? I ask these questions," he says, "and make these criticisms as a hopelessly imperfect Christian who has great difficulty with many parts of the creed, but one whose greatest joy is growling his way through evensong in remote country churches." He has a way with words, Jonathan, very powerful. And I think you can perhaps determine from that passage alone and the impact it had on me where I got to for the whole idea of bad Christians. Anyway, reading that chapter just shook me to the roots. And, like some kind of epiphany, it sent me down the track of looking for kindred spirits outside the church, outside of the fold of Christianity. And as I say, that's a journey which I've been on ever since, really. But not just that chapter, which specifically addresses the problem of the church's apparent apathy toward environmental degradation. It was the whole book, which was a revelation to me. And it was, for me, a moment of epiphany. Yes, a moment of conversion, you could say. The beginning of my commitment to a green theology, to a green or a creation-centered Christian spirituality, and to, a lot of reflection in terms of what it meant for my life and for our society. So anyway, I don't very often do this, but I immediately wrote to Jonathan Porritt asking if we could meet, which we did at the offices of Friends of the Earth on City Road in London. And after talking, I invited him to come and speak at a large annual event which I co-hosted called Festival. It was held on the Staffordshire Agriculture Showground, which brought together, about 6,000 or 7,000 people from house churches, which was, where I was a leader at that time across the country. And I explained several times to the gathered company before he arrived that Jonathan wasn't coming as an evangelical Christian, but he was coming as someone with a crucial message for our time, which we as Christians needed to hear and get on board with. Well, he's a very eloquent man with great humanity, and he spoke incredibly well, and he attempted to build a bridge toward the congregation by speaking about green spirituality, which included mention of things like Mother Earth, which for a lot of people there was a sort of red flag kind of phrase, and they took it as confirmation that he was really some kind of pagan and not to be trusted. And nor was I, because I'd brought him there. Apparently, one pastor, back in the darkness of the auditorium, led a group of 40 or 50 people to walk out on the talk because, they so passionately disagreed with it. I didn't see that, but afterwards I was literally thronged by angry people who were, some of them were shouting at me. There were red faces, and people were telling me things like, "You've invited the devil into God's living room." No, actually, it was Jonathan Porritt, a terribly lovely man. Actually, somebody said the devils were laughing in hell tonight with sort of bulging eyes, to which I said, well, I'd agree. I just wouldn't agree as to what they were laughing at. And anyway, I received more hate mail about that visit than anything else that I've ever done, which is saying something over the years. In a book published later that year about the demonic seduction of the New Age movement, I was actually credited with introducing paganism into the house churches. If only I thought. Anyway, thankfully, Jonathan heard none of all of that. He was approached by a handful of people who really appreciated what he'd said, and he left the next day, having sipped single malt with me until about 4 a.m., so he would be happy. But he left feeling that he was among friends. And a few months later, he sent me a copy of a talk that he'd given, in which he commented on the wonderful gathering that he had addressed, where thousands of evangelical Christians celebrated God's earth. Basically, Jonathan Porritt and his book, and me inviting him to speak at festival, were all part of my winding road out of the evangelical charismatic sector of the church. I'd known for a while that I was around peg in a square hole, but that kind of brought it all to a head. But not before, mind you. I had the opportunity to give talks at places like Spring Harvest on environmentalism, and having people tell me afterwards that I was wasting my time because, it's all going to burn anyway when Jesus returns. The important thing is saving souls from hell, etc. Anyway, it was around that time that I also took part in a program about caring for creation on a Christian radio station called Premier. And I was a guest with the then Bishop of Birmingham, Hugh Montefiore, a vocal campaigner for the environment in the House of Bishops, and a trustee of Friends of the Earth. He was, a gentlemanly, rather posh man for a working class scouser like me. But he was someone who was often in trouble for his controversial views. In a paper, for example, that he gave in, mid-1960s, he said that it should not be discounted, that the very unconventional lifestyle celibacy of Jesus could be down to him being homosexual by orientation. Woo! That was in the mid-1960s. Anyway, Hugh and I each said our bit on Premier Radio, and then came the phone in, which is always the bit I dreaded. And a caller phoned in and said, "I think we've got to be very careful about all these new age things like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth." And as this sort of little rant went on, Hugh leaned toward me and he whispered, "These people tire me." Well, rather embarrassingly, the sheer restraint of that comment, knowing what he probably really wanted to say, made me laugh out loud. And I have to say that "these people tire me" is still something that me and Pat rather naughtily whispered to each other in given circumstances. More importantly, though, Hugh Montefiore set me on the track of appreciating the sacramentality of the whole earth, of experiencing the divine in and through nature itself, something that would become increasingly important to me as years went on. And indeed, many years later, when I'd left the house church movement and I was leading Holy Joe's in a Clapham pub, and I was on my way into ordination in the Church of England, I wrote a master's dissertation on the hermeneutics of ecological theology. Nice little mouthful. Which the Bishop of London, then Richard Charters, liked a lot, and led to him appointing me as his chaplain for the environment. You know, a little appointment which helped me keep out of mischief for several years. And the nub of my dissertation was this, that after considering various models of ecological theology, it was a sacramental vision of creation that worked best for me. In other words, I believe that in this precarious age, it is divine immanence that we need to focus on so much, a sense of God being profoundly present in the very fibre of creation. And that isn't, by the way, to discount divine transcendence. There's always a tension between transcendence and immanence. But I think it's an overemphasis on transcendence that has got us into this mess in the first place. I believe every atom of the universe is imbued with divinity, that God's Spirit is the energizing life force that ignited the Big Bang and which thrusts forward the process of cosmic and biological evolution. To quote a little bit from my book, Black Sheep and Prodigals, I said something like this. I said, if we think of the Big Bang at the creation of the universe as an explosion of divine energy, then the creation is a continuous bursting forth of God's Spirit. It's impossible to avoid God, in other words, wherever we turn. In religious language, we could say that the universe is a divine sacrament, and every breath we draw, every step we take, every loaf of bread we eat, every hand offered in friendship should be received with gratitude as Holy Communion. So, hey, am I a pagan? No, not really, though some of my friends are pagans, and I would say they are among the kindest, gentlest, most godly, fun people that I know. Fellow travellers on the way, I'd say. And I take it as a compliment to be identified with them, even if the person speaking is calling me a pagan, is meaning that as an insult. As I've said many times, labels mean nothing. It's who we are that counts. Am I a pantheist? Do I believe that God and creation are one and the same? No, I'm not a pantheist, but I am a panentheist. I believe that God is in everything and everything is in God. Nature, the material world, is a dwelling of the divine, or as Sally McFaig puts it, the world is the body of God. So hey, that being so, I reckon we should be pretty careful how we treat it, don't you? So anyway, here's a prayer. Mothering God, from whose womb all things proceed, oak trees, mountain streams, clams, pink cockatoos, and beetles, some say the most important of all. Your DNA is dispersed throughout the earth without discrimination. Even in humans, your image still lingers, despite the thoughtless and despicable treatment of your creation that daily overshadows our better efforts. Forgive our arrogance in assuming that this splendid earth was ours to do with as we pleased. Forgive the nonchalant business as usual culture of which we're a part, that has landed us and your beautiful world in such a mess. Help us to live more mindfully, to behave more responsibly, to live more sacrificially, to pursue justice more passionately. Amen. Well, I for one would like to drink to that, so if you have a drink handy, then I invite you to join me. I'll just pour a little bit out into this lovely glass, actually, which was a gift from our lovely friend Sue. I thought it was too nice to have in the shed, actually, but Sue said, no, use it. So here it is. Very heavy and lovely. So, dear friends, I propose a toast to the blue planet, planet Earth, our home, the only splash of colour in our dark part of the galaxy. I propose a toast to the billions of creatures with whom we share this place, to whom we are not being very kind in many instances. I propose a toast to living generously so that all may flourish. To life, l'chaim. Well, there you go. That's just about it. If you like what I'm doing here in the shed, you can support us by buying us a coffee. You just need to follow the link on your screen now. It's always at the top of the posts on the Holy Shed Facebook page too. And, you know, so many thanks to all of you who support us and encourage us in this and many other ways too. So I'm just about finished. I'm going to close actually with two videos. One's a video of Jonathan Porritt, who, by the way, has a book out at the moment. I thought I had a copy of it here somewhere, but I don't seem to. But he's got a rather lovely book out at the moment. And also this video is him speaking on an Extinction Rebellion little promo tape. You might not like Extinction Rebellion or their methods, doesn't really matter. It's the issue that counts. And you can get a feel of Jonathan and what he's about in this video, which is going to be followed by a version of the Canticle of the Sun, that beautiful prayer of St. Francis that speaks of Brother Sun and Mother Earth and so on and so forth. So, hey, have a great week. Be kind to people. It doesn't cost you anything. Be kind to yourself. That's really important. Stay human, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Jonathan Porritt. I've been involved in environmental issues for more than 40 years. And the truth of it is that our planet is now on fire, literally in some countries and metaphorically everywhere. And the period of time we've got to douse those flames is really very short indeed. 10 years, 15 max. So yes, I'm panicking, as the inspirational Greta Thunberg invites us all to do, instead of relying on some completely spurious hope that it'll all be okay in the end. As she says, today's climate delayers are the new climate deniers. So really all I can do to add to the powerful advocacy of Extinction Rebellion is simply to say this, that every single thing we do to prevent runaway climate change will simultaneously make for a better world, a fairer world, a more compassionate world, a world in which our cities are cleaner, our diets are healthier, transport works better, and so on. And this is not for future generations, a phrase which I've noticed allows politicians to avoid that fierce urgency of now. This is for all of us, for today. And that really means that whatever we're already doing, we have to accept that it isn't enough. We have to accept the science of climate change, the irrefutable science of climate change, and then we have to be prepared to go the extra mile. And that's why I'm supporting Extinction Rebellion, and I hope that you will too, in whatever way you can.